Several years ago, my husband and I decided that we would go to Brooklyn, New York on a sentimental journey. Jim and I lived there when he was an intern at Kings County Hospital, and we were still practically newlyweds. It was a wonderful time, and I found that there was a bed and breakfast across the street from the house that we had lived in. So nothing would do but that we went there for the weekend to take a moment to look back and enjoy a memory. But you know, those things don't always turn out exactly like you expected it would, do they? We arrived, it was a good day. We got settled in our bed and breakfast, which was quite nice, well renovated, beautiful house, and we could look right across the street and see the house we lived in when we were just kids, really, in our 20s. We went out to walk the neighborhood, and we hadn't gone but about a block and a half when I had a pain in the back of my right leg that just hit, and I felt like I just couldn't walk. Every step I took was just an agony in the back of my leg. Jim knelt down and he felt behind the knee and in the calf, and he couldn't be sure just by touch that it was not a deep vein thrombosis, which can be very dangerous. There was a doc in the box right there near the subway. So we stepped in, and the doctor there examined it, and neither could he decide whether it was a deep vein thrombosis, so there was only one thing left to do. You'll have to go to the hospital to get a Doppler. Saturday afternoon. I said, well, hey, Jim, this is an opportunity. Let's go to Kings County Hospital, and you can just walk down your memory lane while they're checking out. I'm not taking you there. It's much too dangerous. And the doctor joined in and said, take her down Ocean Highway to Coney Island Hospital. And that's what we did. Now, Coney Island Hospital is also a member of the New York City hospital chain. It's a city hospital. And what made us think that it was any different than Kings County Hospital, I have no idea. We went in, they checked me in, they understood that we were travelers, that I had a potentially dangerous thing, and so they put me right back in the emergency room, where I learned that the man that works the Doppler had left for the day and wouldn't be back until 9 o'clock in the morning. There was only one thing to do. We'll give you blood thinners and we'll admit you to the emergency room. Well, that wasn't a particularly wonderful option, but it was the only option I had. And the first thing I knew, I was in a hospital gown, sitting on a rock-hard gurney, surrounded by a salmon-colored pink screen, you know, a curtain, making a little cubicle. It was a huge room. They must have been able to accommodate 75 people at a time. And I had no more than sat down on that bed and pulled back the curtains than I heard this ruckus coming toward me. I was facing the entrance corridor, and here came a gurney with a 300-pound man chained to it and two NYPD burly policemen pushing him down the aisle, and he was screaming obscenities. It could have been ER in the television. Unscripted, of course, and I began to be interested in what was happening. I'd only been there 20 minutes. So I took out my pad and my pencil, and I started making notes on the things that I saw, the things that I heard. Jim left to go back to the bed and breakfast to get some personal items, and I'll pick up a sandwich. And while he was gone, I began to listen. It was like being at the Tower of Babel, so many different languages and so many different people coming and going, and I was facing the nurse's desk so I could see all of that activity. And the first thing you know, I was going because I was being shifted to another position in the middle of the room. And next to me was an old woman in the next bed. Her son was sitting next to her bed, and she began to scream, "I need a pan, I need a pan, get me a pan." And nobody came for her. There were no such things as bells. You had to just let people know that you needed something. The son looked around and, "Help us." The woman screamed out, "Help me, help me." A nurse came right by the side of my gurney, and I said, "Can't you give that woman a bedpan?" "We will in our time." Well, our time never came, and finally the son pulled the curtains. He had scouted up a bedpan, and he helped his mother and cleaned her up. And I made notes in my journal. They moved me a little while later closer to a young man with his wife sitting next to the bed. He was in for some heart thing, and her face was so tense and worried as she leaned over, kissed him on the cheek, and held his hand. There was a young woman. They had put in an IV, and it began to infiltrate, which means that it wasn't running into the vein, it was running into the arm, under the skin, and her arm was swelling up. And she's calling out for help, and no help came. She looked at me, and I said, "Scream. Scream as loud as you can." And she did, and no one came. And I saw her rip that needle out of her arm. She threw it onto the bed and put her clothes on, stood up, and she looked at me and she said, "I'm done here," and walked out. Everywhere you looked, these things were beginning to happen. Just as Jim came back, someone handed me the supper. They come in on a little 2-layer cart. It was a brown paper bag. I reached inside. There were 2 slices of brown bread in a baggie, whole wheat bread, with a slice of American cheese, no mayonnaise or anything, forget that, and dry. A few vanilla wafers, applesauce, and a cup of apple juice. That was the supper that was being handed out in the emergency room. Believe me, Jim's tuna salad sandwich tasted a heck of a lot better. I didn't want Jim to leave, and he didn't want to leave me. It was a difficult environment to be in. And in among all of this other stuff that was going on, there was an elderly lady with flaming red hair and her pink volunteer jacket, and she was flitting from gurney to gurney. "Hello, dearie. Hello, sweetheart. Is there anything I can get you?" I couldn't decide whether it was more insane or a moment of sanity and kindness that was moving around within all this mess. Finally, Jim was exhausted by midnight. He'd had to stand until he could locate an empty chair and pull it over to the bed. He'd been standing for over an hour. Finally sat down, reading a magazine. I was laying on the flat, rock-hard gurney, with my leg hurting worse from the gurney than it had from what I thought was a deep vein thrombus. And Jim decided he really needed to go to the car, and it would be safe because he was under a street light in the parking lot very near the entrance to the emergency room, and there was a policeman on duty. That left me, now I had been moved to a little 2-person alcove, and I was on the right side of this, and Mr. Jack, a very elderly man, was in the next gurney next to me. Mr. Jack had no idea where he was. "How did I get to this house? Who brought me here anyway? I don't know that I like it here. Get me a pee bottle." What he was saying was sometimes so interesting and funny that I started writing it down in my notebook. He didn't like bananas, and I knew that because he said, "Get my bananas. I have bananas at my apartment. There are 40 bananas in my refrigerator. I hate bananas. Turn off the refrigerator." "Get me a pee bottle." And a nurse would walk by and say, "Pee in your diaper." He'd drop off to sleep, and I don't know where he went when he went to sleep, but I was sure that it was far better than what he was experiencing when he was awake. The time ticked slowly. I felt like I was pinned under these lights like a butterfly because they never dimmed the lights. They were bright, vivid, on you all night long. At about 4 o'clock, Jim was still out in the car. I got up to go to the bathroom, and as long as I was up paddling around, barefooted in my hospital gown with a sweater on, I just walked out and went out to the car and said, please come back in. I'm losing touch with reality. And he did. He came back. At 7 o'clock, the doctors assembled for rounds. I saw the chief in the middle of the group. And as he came toward my gurney, the woman said, don't bother with her. She's just a woman that's here waiting for a Doppler. We don't need to bother with her. And they started to pass me by. And I sat straight up on the gurney and I said, stop, wait, stop. And he turned and looked at me with very kind eyes. He walked over and he touched me on the arm and he said, what is the problem? And I said, I'm just here to get a Doppler. I'm a traveler. I've been here since 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Please help me to get out of here. I will, madam. You will be the first one at 9 o'clock. And I was. Jim stood by as the technician scanned my leg. There was no deep vein thrombus. And the chief resident came over to me when I came back down and said, madam, you can go home now. You can leave. And I did. Jim and I walked out, but I stopped and I looked back. It was quiet now at 9:30 in the morning. Things hadn't heated up for the day. And I wondered what would happen there the rest of the day. I didn't want to stay and find out, I can promise you that. But I knew that I would never forget having been there. We got in the car, and as we drove out, I said, Jim, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I ruined our trip. You didn't ruin it, Eloise. It just was changed. And that's my story of the Coney Island Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. A look at the real situation of medical care. Thank you so much for stopping by to hear my story. Some stories are maybe not really stories, but they're so vivid that you'll never forget them. And if you like stories, come the third Wednesday of the month to Friendship Heights. It's Friendship Village Heights Community Center in Chevy Chase. 2 storytellers every month, free for you.